I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Dennis De Witt, who has, besides being a Malacca Dutch heritage, he has written a lot of books. And I'm a little sad because I have Dennis's books, and every time I come to Malacca, knowing that I'm going to meet Dennis, I forgot to bring them because I want his autograph on my book. So I'll have to remember next time. Yeah. So over to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Nach. So yeah, my name is Dennis De Witt. I'm a Malakka Dutch Eurasian. Now that's something you don't hear of very often, because when you talk about Eurasians, the Serrani, you think about the Portuguese Eurasians. But the fact of the matter is, because of our three different colonial eras, we also have the Portuguese Eurasians, as well as the Dutch, the British, and there are even Eurasians of other heritage, European heritage. There are German Eurasians, there are Scandinavian Eurasians.
French.
French, you're right, absolutely. How can I forget? So, the Malacca community of Dutch descendants was strong in the earlier period, during the British times. As Tuan Haji Roslis mentioned just now accurately, is that there were a community of Dutch Eurasians here from the Dutch era. A lot of the Dutch Europeans who were based in Malacca left Malacca by 1825. 1824 was the treaty.
Yes.
The handover was actually done in 1825. So the people who were left behind, according to the treaty, were given 11 years to choose where do you want to go to. You either stay here and assume your British nationality, swear alliance to the British, or otherwise go back to your country, or correctly to one of the different towns in Indonesia, preferably Batavia. Now, if you were already born and bred in Malacca, you have generations of ancestors who lived in Malacca. Your family was buried in Malacca, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Why would you want to leave such a lovely town? So you carry on, you stay. You become British. You give up your Dutch heritage, you give up your Dutch culture, and you adopt a new culture because the political situation has changed. So what is also interesting is that, correctly as you mentioned, with the opening of the port of Singapore, a lot of Dutch descendants did leave Malacca to Singapore. They operated their businesses there. But nevertheless, Malacca was always their hometown. They came back to Malacca. They still own property, they still own estates. They had a home here. But eventually they find it very difficult to actually go back to their roots. And the families just stayed on in Singapore. In later years, other families migrated to other places as well. Even I myself, I was born and bred in Malacca. But now, because of work, I work in Kuala Lumpur. It's not so different from those days. What is also very interesting is that I think the title of Bridging the Past to the Present is really very relevant. I am a Dutch Eurasian from Malacca. There are others like me as well around, not as big as the Portuguese community. But there's also a strong presence in the current Dutch community in Malaysia. I'm so happy to see there are members of the Dutch expatriate community here in Malaysia present here today. Yes. So the Dutch has had a very long presence, not only in Malacca, but in Malaysia, specifically for trade, for business, and it continues to be a very important business partner for Malaysia itself. Matter of fact, we have the managing director of the Malaysian Dutch Business Council with us today, as well as the members of their team. So that connection between the past and the present is everlasting, and it continues to be so. Now, the other thing that I would like to touch on is that when you talk about the Dutch era, we all know it's a very long era, beginning from, people say 1641, but it's not true. It goes back way beyond that. It goes back to the first visit by the Dutch in 1602, not to Malacca, but to Johor. And it carries all the way back to when the Dutch actually physically transferred possession of Malacca to the British in 1825. Now, if you look at this whole era collectively, you will have a problem when you study history. Because in different eras, different things happened. So I like to break up the different eras, and you can see clearly what happened when. So in 1602, the first Dutch admiral arrived in Batu Sawah in Johor. It was a trip to create friendship. The Sultan of Johor tested the Dutch, and that's why you have the Santa Catarina incident that took place. Very important incident, huh? Because of the Santa Catarina incident, was the basis for international laws that we have until today. So that was the initial contact that they had. The Dutch had proven themselves to be friendly towards the Malays in Johor. But the Sultan of Johor definitely at that time had an enemy, the Portuguese in Malacca. And the Dutch turned out to be also the enemies of the Portuguese. And as they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that was the basis for a strong friendship that they had. From then, a lot of people do not realize also that the Sultan of Johor sent his ambassador on the Dutch ship to Amsterdam. And that ambassador, unfortunately, did not survive. But someone else from the group in Johor, from Johor, survived, and he became the official ambassador of the Sultan of Johor to Holland at that time. And we know his name. He was identified as Encik Kamar. And again, that was based on the friendship, the diplomacy that they had between Johor and Holland. And when finally Johor, jointly with Batavia, decided that they had enough of the Portuguese hassle towards Johor, they decided to combine their forces once and for all to push the Portuguese out of Malacca in 1640. And that, of course, we know, that siege lasted a very long 6 months. And many people died from both sides. The Malays fought in the wars. They died not only because of the fighting, but of the disease. Probably malaria that was very rampant at that time. And so did the Dutch. They went through several captains before finally capturing Malacca. Now, what is also very interesting that was left out in our history books is that a lot of people do not remember the agreement that the Dutch had with the Sultan of Johor for the capture of Malacca. The agreement was, when Malacca was captured, the Dutch would jointly rule Malacca with the Sultan of Johor. The VOC forces are supposed to take up the area north of the Malacca River. And the Sultan was invited to bring his palace and place it south of the Malacca River. South means probably on St. Paul's Hill, back again. So the Sultan of Johor would have had his palace here in Malacca at where we are right now. But the Sultan of Johor respectfully declined. And he says, okay, I'll just remain where I am, and you guys have Malacca, and we're going to be good friends. So after Malacca fell in 1641, can you imagine, from the wars, practically everything was destroyed after that 6 months. So the Dutch had to rebuild Malacca, practically from scratch. The governor's house, the Portuguese governor's house, where we are now today, was fully destroyed or just left to ruins, that the Dutch had to build a new house. And the Stadthuys, how do you get the plans for the Stadthuys? How do you build a Stadthuys? The Stadthuys basically means the city hall. Right? So they copied the plans from the Stadthuys of Horn, the city of Horn, and placed it here. But if you go to Horn, you won't find the Stadthuys, the same Stadthuys there anymore, because it had been destroyed. And the only way to see that old Stadthuys is to come to this Stadthuys here in Malacca. So from 1641 to about 1700s, it was a very shaky time in Malacca. It was shaky in the sense that you had to rebuild everything. There was a lot of expenditure. You need to regenerate business. You try to invite people to come to Malacca to restore the economy of Malacca. And they were still at war with Portugal. Holland was still at war with Portugal. But by 1700s, things had changed. Because of the different wars that happened in Europe, Holland suddenly found themselves friendly with the Portuguese on the same side. And by 1700s, as what Tuan Haji Rosli mentioned, it was more of stability. The town has already been built. People have already settled down here in Malacca. So then why do we have wars? Because there were still two sieges that happened, very important sieges that we learn of in our history books. Both of them has to do with the Bugis. One was with Daeng Kemboja, who led the siege against Malacca, and the second one, as we mentioned, is Raja Haji. Okay? Both of them were based in Johor. The Bugis had come to Johor in the 1700s and established themselves to be the protector of the Sultan of Johor. How did the Dutch in Malacca feel about it? That's fine. As long as you don't disrupt trade, you don't disrupt the economy, that's fine. But when it came to a point when Johor still had to refer, or preferred to refer, to the governor of Malacca at that time, the Bugis took offense. And it was only because of political reasons that the Bugis attacked Malacca. Because they were, after all, fierce warriors. Why did Raja Haji attack Malacca? It was because of a French ship that was based in Riau. Raja Haji had negotiated, supposed to be paid. But in the end, he changed his mind and says, no, it's all right. I prefer just to be friends. I don't want my commission. But at a different point, he started to change his mind, and he blamed the Dutch. Johor had never attacked Malacca. It was the Bugis forces there that came to attack Malacca. So it made only perfect sense for the Dutch in Malacca to maintain peace, not war. Because why disrupt trade? Trade is good. It makes everybody happy. Without trade, then you will have problems. So don't have war, have peace. And of course, by the later period, after the fall of the VOC, until the handover of Malacca, everybody knew what was going to happen by then. Even the Dutch people in Malacca. In my research, I've seen, strangely enough, after 1795, people were just writing letters no longer in Dutch, but in English already, the Dutch here. So they knew, and they quickly adapted. And that's one of the wonderful things, I think, about the Dutch people is that they are very adaptive.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised to find Dutch people speaking Malay nowadays. People who are present here in Malaysia. I've met a Dutch guy who even speaks Tamil very fluently. That's how they are. So, our understanding of history sometimes seems to be a bit skewed because we forget about the other issues, probably in the interest of nationalism, I suppose. Right? But let me address the elephant in the room. Okay? When we talk about things like, we should consider our past, it's only in our past. The elephant in the room right now is a very difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about. And I wish, if you don't mind, to address the issue. And that issue is about decolonialization. I'm a Eurasian. There are many Eurasians in Malacca. There are many more Eurasians in Malaysia. The topic of decolonization does the Eurasians no favor. Because we are part of the colonial past. Now, do we accept the sins of our fathers? The past. Even the Dutch people, the modern Dutch people, have come to terms with the difficult moments that they had in Indonesia, mainly in Indonesia. They are aware that the VOC, from their country, doesn't sound really good. right? Remco, if you don't mind, what are the Dutch so shameful about?
I think all the atrocities our forefathers did in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Especially killing a lot of people. I think they depopulated whole islands.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of trade.
Right.
In a very violent way. So that's something that we're not very proud of.
You're absolutely right. But we don't see that in Malacca. The reason for it, it happened during colonial times. A lot of the atrocities.
Because that was VOC period, the company, not Dutch period. Two different.
But, however, when you look at the story of Makassar, Banda. Makassar, there was also the massacre. But Banda, the massacre of Banda. Now that's very strange. To me, it's a very strange story because Jan Peterson Koen was blamed for that atrocities, for that massacre. You'll be surprised to find that Jan Peterson Koen was actually a junior officer when he first arrived in Batu Sawah in Johor. And he was met by the Sultan of Johor, and they were all on friendly terms. So how can a person who had a first very good impression of the Malays in this part of the world can suddenly resort to being the murderer of Banda? I think the answer is very obvious, Rosli, because he witnessed himself, his fellow officers being murdered, his friends, the people that he sailed with together. They were massacred, they were killed by the Bandanese. And of course, that must have changed a person. Right before your eyes, you see your best buddies being slaughtered down. And then, only then, he harbored the feeling of revenge. But what about in Malacca? What are the sins of our fathers, of the Dutch people at that time? Sarge, do you have an opinion? What do you think? Maybe it's slavery? Do you agree that it could be slavery? But if you say it's slavery, were the Dutch people the only slave owners at that time? That's not true. You cannot judge the past in present terms, because everybody owned slaves. You could be a slave as well. And slavery in this part, in Malacca, was so strange. It's not the same as slavery we understand in the movies from America. It's different here. You can be bought as a slave. You can even volunteer yourself to be a slave. You think slavery doesn't exist anymore? It still exists in some form. And everybody was slave owners at that time. So, I wonder why we have such a bad impression of these people who are before us. How is it, Rosli, that I hear stories of people typing in Facebook forums and say, St. Paul's Hill should be destroyed because these were the work of the evil people, the evil Europeans who came here. You should rebuild the mosque of the Sultan of Malacca on top of St. Paul's Hill. How is it the tombstones on St. Paul's Hill were defaced? Why have Malaysians become so crazy to think that the people of the past are the enemies of the people today?
Not Malaysian, not all. Okay. You answer.
Thank you, Dennis.